Welcome to NMS. Let's talk about the scientific trainer or the science-based trainer. Now, I'm a scientist. I study chemistry, I study biochemistry. I've got a Master of Food Nutrition. I worked as a scientist for many years. So the scientific method is basically worked around proving that something doesn't work. And if it works, despite whatever you throw at it, it's robust, it should work. Okay, that's what science is. It's about proving something wrong to prove that it's actually right. So if you can prove that it works under various circumstances, it's a good method. Now, obviously the science-based trainer is looking at how we eat, how we train, what works best to build muscle, okay? And then what we do is we obviously throw out some of the things that we used to do because it doesn't work, and we also start bringing in more things in our training that we've proven work. Now, there's a big problem with science-based trainers, and it's the fact that science comes after, the practice. So you've got to do the practice first, and then you go to the science and you prove that it works. Okay, that's pretty much how it works. So you create the method, you practice the method, and then you find an experimental way to prove whether that method works or doesn't work. Okay, but the problem that with the science-based trainers and a lot of science that's coming out is that it's very hard to find real-life examples. And when I say that, okay, cool, let's find examples of people that we can experiment on. So there's two types they use. Ones that are maybe trained for 2 to 5 years, or ones that are trained for, let's say, not very long at all, or they're ranked beginners. That's cool. We do that experiment, we try them on different techniques, and we see if it works. The problem is in the real world example, and let's say we talk about your Ronnies, your Jay Cutlers, your Dorian Yates, and let's say before that your Lee Haneys, your Lee Labradas, your Lee Priests, okay? All of those guys had their various methods of training. Tom Platz being a prime example of one that used to use frightening intensity and a lot of different things that he did. And it all worked, but why did it all work? Okay, I guess this is the thing that we need to go and discuss. Now, as bodybuilders or even people that just like to build a little bit of muscle in the gym, there's certain things that we need to go and build muscle. We need intensity, we need progression, we need recovery, and we need nutrients, okay? Obviously with the recovery we need the nutrients, but we also need sleep, okay? So people have their different methods of doing things, okay? Right back to the 60s and 70s we knew that definitely protein was important to go on building muscle. So guys like Arnold were eating a lot of meat and taking protein powders, and we still do that to this day. We still try and get enough protein. What we've discovered over the years is that having huge amounts of protein is not necessary, but we're slowly starting to discover that more protein is better, which is great, okay? So we go and check, okay, is it 1.6 grams per kilogram? Oh yeah, that works, that puts on muscle, but maybe we can put more muscle on by eating 2.5 grams per kilogram or 2 grams per kilogram. So we do these tests and we go and see whether there's more or less growth. But you've got to remember that when we're working with different people, when you do a science-based method, there is always an average. So you're going to get average results was this much muscle gain. But maybe some people put almost no muscle. Maybe some people were outliers and put a lot of muscle, okay? So you're going to have variability in those science-based methods. So does that mean that the method is wrong? No, that means that maybe the method works for some people, but not as well for other people, okay? We look at volume, okay, we add more volume, maybe some people respond quite well to more volume. Maybe some people don't respond as well to volume, okay? I know I've taken some people that, I can give them, 2 exercises, 2 sets max, and they're completely fatigued. I don't have to do too much in the workout. Short workout, sharp, they gain muscle and they're good. They try to do, 20 sets per body part, they won't get results. I know some people can train 6 to even 7 days a week and then there's other people that probably can only do 4 or 5. Some people have got great results with me training 3 days a week. Does that mean that it's not scientific? No, that's not what it means. It just means that obviously you have a variability in what people respond to and how well they respond to it. Okay? So science-based training obviously has to take into account for the fact that we're not all the same. So on an average something works, but not always for every single person. Now, obviously it'd be remiss of me not to go and talk about steroids. Now, a lot of people who are science-based trainers will look at guys on steroids and go, oh yeah, they just grew because they were on steroids. No, not necessarily. People on steroids still have to go and train with intensity, with progression, get recovery, and obviously get the adequate nutrients in. Even more nutrients than what a normal person needs, because obviously they're a lot bigger, their metabolism is faster, and their calorie needs are higher, and their protein needs are higher because they're a bigger person. So there's still the science behind that. Obviously you need to be able to go and get enough nutrients in, okay? And training stimulus. I guess the advantage to steroids is they give you better recovery and you can probably train more often. But it's funny because I was actually watching Dorian Yates the other day go and say, well, some guys train 6 days a week, get very little results. They think, oh, if I'm a hard gainer, I'm going to start using steroids. They get better results with steroids. They think, oh, it was just because I'm a hard gainer. Now, it's probably because you're training too often, you're not getting the recovery, and you're probably not training, with good intensity and good progression, okay? Now, steroids do create a small shortcut to people, but if you train with a scientific approach of making sure you have intensity, progression, and recovery, you'll get even better results, okay? So you can't go and look at steroids and go, steroids are the key to bigger people growing, but a normal natural person like myself, okay, you have to train perfectly scientific, okay? Now, another thing that I brought up is range of motion, At peak contraction, you have less tension. At full stretch, you have less tension, but most of your tension on the muscle is actually in the working range of the muscle, which is to a mild stretch and getting closer to a contraction, but it's actually a very small window, okay? What you'll find is that especially on your pressing movements, okay, doing full contraction movements probably doesn't build the muscle. Same with doing it on calves, same with doing it even on things like, shoulders and so forth, okay? And when you're doing back, does it mean that you have to stretch fully on your back? Well, according to the science-based trainer, we should get maximum stretch. Yet the majority of guys that have the biggest backs, we're probably doing bent over rows, pull-ups, pull-downs, and all the big basic movements, weren't using excessive ranges of motion. So does that mean it's wrong? I'm going to end this video basically with this sort of thinking, okay? There is science and then there is real life, okay? So in an experimental situation, you can see things and you can sort of see what sort of results you get for people, okay? Obviously there's going to be variations because there's variations in people's recovery, how well they sleep, and obviously their lifestyle outside of the experiment, okay? But if we look at it from a perspective of, okay, what is best for each individual, okay? Tall people, maybe they don't like big ranges of motion and they're prone to injury, okay? So they're not going to be able to do huge ranges of motion like a short person can do. They don't squat the same, maybe a lot of leg movements are different, upper body movements, they use big ranges of motion, they're probably going to use more arms than they do chest. So we do have to allow for some variation in what we believe is optimal versus optimal for each person, and experiment a little bit to try and find what works for each individual. Because obviously my thought process is, if someone feels an exercise and if they're getting stronger on an exercise and they're getting good progress from an exercise, does it matter if it's not the perfect exercise according to the scientific based trainer? Probably not, okay? But they're getting results out of it. So therefore it's optimal for getting results, okay? Maybe they could fix their form a little bit, maybe it might work better. Maybe they'll get more injuries. the thing that we've got to really look at is that people work jobs, people work labourers jobs, people obviously have different abilities to digest foods. So maybe getting enough protein in for some people is difficult because of digestion. All right, so we have to be pretty specific on what sort of proteins. And just because red meat is high in amino acids doesn't mean it's a very good red meat or a good meat for someone, okay? Maybe that person is better off having something that's more digestible. So I've talked a lot of different factors in this, but really there is science, and then there is practice, and then there is obviously variations in people's experience, and also with that experience and the amount of muscle they built, maybe they build muscle different than other people, and then throw in that performance enhancing drugs and all the other factors. It's very hard to work within an experiment when the experiment is so broad. Okay, so it's good to be up with the science, but also be realistic of the fact that people vary, and we also have to vary their program based on that variation. Thanks for listening, guys. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and more videos coming soon. Thank you.